The train was already moving when most of the passengers realized something about it felt wrong. It was not the speed, which was steady and calm, nor the sound of the wheels, which followed the familiar rhythm of metal on rail. It was the silence between those sounds, the way conversation seemed to thin and vanish as if swallowed before reaching another ear. The train had no name painted on its sides, only a dull gray body and windows that reflected faces back with unsettling clarity. The ticket collectors had vanished shortly after departure, leaving behind only the faint smell of oil and old paper. The route was supposed to be ordinary. A long-distance night journey through mountains, connecting cities that had existed for centuries. The tunnels were well known, carved decades ago through rock older than memory. There were many of them, long tunnels, short tunnels, tunnels that bent like spines beneath the earth. Most passengers paid them no attention at first. The first tunnel passed without incident, except for the lights flickering longer than expected and a brief pressure in the ears that felt deeper than altitude should cause. When the train emerged, no one noticed immediately that the last carriage was gone. It took time for absence to become visible. A woman walking back from the dining car stopped suddenly, confused by the way the corridor ended sooner than it should have. A man searching for the restroom frowned at the sealed metal wall where another door should have been. Murmurs began, soft at first, dismissed as miscounting, as fatigue, as tricks of dim lighting. The train did not slow. No announcement came. Outside, the mountains slid by as if nothing had changed. The second tunnel came sooner than expected. Longer, darker, swallowing the train so completely that even emergency lights dimmed to a dull red glow. Inside the tunnel, something changed in the air. Passengers felt it crawl across their skin, a low vibration that was not sound but pressure, as if the darkness itself were breathing. Children began to cry without knowing why. Adults grew restless, fingers tapping, jaws tightening. And then, in the reflection of the windows, something moved that was not inside the train. No one saw it directly at first. It appeared as distortion, as a bending of reflection, as a shape that did not align with the faces staring back. Long, thin limbs seemed to stretch along the glass, jointed in impossible ways. A head emerged where no head should fit, crowned with hollow spaces that suggested eyes without containing them. It did not enter the train. It did not need to. Its presence pressed inward, invading thought rather than space. When the train emerged from the tunnel, screaming broke out. Another carriage was missing. This time there was no doubt. Panic spread quickly, but not evenly. Some passengers shouted, demanded answers, tried to move forward toward the engine. Others froze, sitting rigidly, eyes unfocused, breathing shallow and fast. A few smiled, small empty smiles that did not match their faces. One man began to hum softly, repeating the same 3 notes again and again, as if comforting himself or something else entirely. The third tunnel loomed ahead, visible through the front windows like a mouth cut into stone. Before the train entered it, arguments erupted. People shouted that they had to stop the train, that they had to pull emergency brakes, that something was terribly wrong. Yet when hands reached for the brake handles, they hesitated. Fingers trembled, then withdrew. A strange reluctance spread, a shared unspoken understanding that stopping might be worse than continuing. No one could explain why they felt this way, only that the thought of halting inside a tunnel filled them with a deeper terror than moving forward. Inside the third tunnel, the creature appeared fully. It did not have a stable shape. It unfolded from darkness like a thought taking form, tall and thin, then wide and sprawling, then collapsing inward again. Its surface was not flesh but something like shadow stretched too far, tearing and reforming. Where its face should have been, there was an opening that suggested depth without end. From that opening came no sound, yet every passenger felt spoken to in the most intimate language of their own minds. It did not command. It reminded. People began to remember things they had buried. Regrets. Cowardice. Moments when they had stayed silent. Moments when they had chosen comfort over truth. The creature did not accuse, it reflected. Under its influence, passengers began to act strangely, some laughing, some sobbing, some standing up and walking calmly toward the ends of the train as if answering a call only they could hear. When the train exited the tunnel, 3 more carriages were gone. Those left behind barely noticed the loss anymore. Their sense of number was dissolving. Time felt fractured. Conversations looped or cut off mid-sentence, forgotten instantly. A woman insisted she had boarded with her husband, then seconds later claimed she had always been alone. A group of passengers gathered to plan, then forgot why they had gathered before a single decision could be made. With each tunnel, the pattern repeated. Darkness. Pressure. The creature's presence. Strange behavior. Separation. Carriages lagged behind, slipping away soundlessly as if unhooked by invisible hands. Those in the lost carriages were never seen again. There were no screams from behind, no crashes, no signs of destruction. The train simply became shorter, and the remaining passengers felt increasingly hollow, as if parts of themselves were being removed along with the metal and seats. Eventually, the passengers realized the truth too late. The creature did not take people randomly. The carriages that vanished were always the ones filled with those who had fully surrendered to its influence. Those who stopped resisting their memories. Those who let the creature define them. Those who ceased questioning. The final tunnels were the longest. The train crawled through them, lights barely glowing, the air thick with despair. Only a handful of passengers remained now, scattered through the front cars, exhausted, shaking, but still aware. They clung to each other, speaking aloud constantly, reminding themselves of their names, their histories, their reasons for living. They refused the silence. They refused the reflection in the glass. When the train finally emerged into daylight for the last time, it did so with only one carriage intact. The rails ended shortly after, leading into open land. The train slowed and stopped on its own. The doors opened. The survivors stepped out into a world that felt unfamiliar but real, the sun harsh and grounding. Behind them, the train dissolved into nothing, as if it had never existed. None of them ever forgot what they had seen. None of them ever entered another tunnel without fear. And none of them ever again ignored the quiet moments when their own thoughts tried to turn against them. The moral of this story is that the greatest monsters do not always destroy us by force. Sometimes they simply encourage us to abandon ourselves. When people stop questioning, stop resisting, and surrender their identity to fear or regret, they begin to fall behind, unnoticed at first, until they are lost completely. Survival belongs not to the strongest, but to those who remain aware, connected, and willing to face darkness without letting it define them. The survivors did not speak for a long time after the train vanished. The land around them stretched flat and colorless, as if drained by the same force that had consumed the carriages. The air smelled clean but empty, carrying no hint of cities, forests, or life beyond the small groups standing beside rusted rails that ended abruptly in the soil. Each survivor felt lighter and heavier at the same time, as though something had been taken from them but replaced with the weight of knowing it was gone. They walked together without agreeing to do so. None of them trusted being alone anymore. There were 7 of them in total, though the number felt fragile, as if it could change if they stopped counting. Elias, a former schoolteacher, found himself speaking names aloud, repeating them like a prayer. Mira, whose hands still trembled, kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, afraid that if she looked back she might see the tunnels rising from the earth like wounds that refused to close. As they moved, memories began to return with painful clarity. Not the ones forced upon them by the creature, but quieter memories, ordinary ones. The taste of morning tea. The sound of rain on rooftops. Laughter shared without suspicion. These memories felt like anchors, holding them to something solid. Yet beneath them ran a deeper current of unease, the sense that the journey was not truly over, only transformed. Night fell without warning. The sky darkened too quickly, stars blinking into existence, as if turned on by an unseen hand. In the distance, a faint rumble echoed, low and familiar. Rails. Wheels. Another train. Panic rippled through the group, but Elias raised his voice, forcing calm into it. He told them the creature had power only in tunnels, only in enclosed darkness where reflection replaced reality. Out here, under open sky, it had no shape. He did not know if this was true, but belief itself felt like armor. The sound grew louder, and lights appeared on the horizon. A train approached, identical to the one they had escaped. Same gray body. Same reflective windows. It slowed as it neared them, doors opening with a soft hiss. Inside, passengers sat calmly, faces relaxed, unaware. The invitation was clear. Some of the survivors stepped back immediately. Others hesitated. The exhaustion was overwhelming. The thought of rest, of returning to normalcy, tempted them deeply. Mara felt it pulling at her, whispering that perhaps this train was different, that perhaps the nightmare had been unique. She saw herself boarding, sitting by the window, letting her thoughts drift. Then she noticed the windows. Her reflection did not match her movements exactly. It lagged, delayed by a fraction of a second. Just enough. She screamed, breaking the spell. The survivors backed away as one. The doors remained open, waiting patiently, like a mouth that did not need to rush. When no one boarded, the train closed its doors and continued forward, disappearing into a tunnel that rose from the earth where none had been before. They understood then that the trains were not accidents. They were cycles. Days passed, or perhaps only hours. Time had become unreliable. The survivors encountered others, scattered individuals who had escaped different trains, different routes. Each carried similar stories, similar scars. Together they began to piece together a pattern. The tunnels existed everywhere, not just in mountains, but in minds. Any place where awareness narrowed, where people stopped questioning, where fear or comfort enclosed them tightly enough, the creature could appear. They began to tell stories to each other constantly. Not dramatic stories, not heroic ones, but small truths. Failures admitted. Lies confessed. Fears spoken aloud. The act of naming these things weakened their grip. In moments of silence, the survivors noticed shadows stretching unnaturally, reflections behaving strangely, but the creature never fully emerged. It hovered at the edges, frustrated, incomplete. One night, as they camped beneath a sky heavy with clouds, Elias finally understood what the creature was. It was not a being that hunted humans. It was a mechanism. A force born from accumulation. Every ignored injustice, every unspoken truth, every moment of chosen blindness fed it. It did not create darkness. It harvested it. The realization terrified him more than the tunnels ever had. The next time a tunnel appeared, rising from the ground like a challenge, the group did not flee. They stood at its entrance, holding hands, hearts pounding. The darkness inside pressed against them, alive and curious. Reflections formed on the tunnel walls, showing them who they had been, who they feared becoming. They spoke together, voices overlapping, naming their truths, refusing silence. The pressure intensified, then fractured. The tunnel shuddered and collapsed inward, dissolving into dust and light. For the first time, something like pain echoed through the darkness, a soundless recoil. They knew then that escape was not enough. Awareness was resistance. Connection was defense. Far away, another train entered another tunnel, its passengers unaware. The cycle was not broken everywhere. But somewhere, a crack had formed. And through cracks, even the oldest darkness eventually starves. The survivors understood that knowing the truth was not the same as ending it. The creature had recoiled, but it had not vanished. Forces born from human neglect rarely disappear. They retreat, adapt, and wait. The group continued to move, not toward any marked destination, but toward openness, wide fields, clear skies, places where sound carried far and reflections had no walls to cling to. They avoided enclosed spaces instinctively now, even sleeping beneath broken structures rather than inside them, preferring cold wind to silent shelter. As time passed, the survivors changed. They became watchful, not fearful. Each of them learned to recognize the early signs, conversations that dulled into repetition, thoughts that narrowed into blame or despair, moments when silence felt heavy rather than peaceful. Whenever these signs appeared, they spoke. Sometimes awkwardly, sometimes painfully, but always honestly. They learned that truth did not need to be elegant to be effective. It only needed to be voiced. One evening, The ground began to tremble again. This time, there were no rails, no visible tunnel, only a distortion in the air itself, like heat rising from stone. The creature emerged more slowly than before, as if weakened, its shape unstable, flickering between forms it could no longer maintain. It reached outward not with limbs, but with memories, trying to draw them inward once more. The survivors did not run. They stood their ground and did something unexpected. They turned away from the creature and toward each other. They spoke of the people they had lost, the carriages that vanished, the lives interrupted without farewell. They grieved openly, without shame, without suppression. The air grew heavy, then lighter. The creature shuddered, its form tearing as if stretched too thin. For the first time, it made a sound, not a roar or a scream, but something closer to collapse. Its shape folded inward, not violently, but quietly, as if finally deprived of what sustained it. The darkness thinned. The pressure lifted. When the air cleared, there was nothing left but empty space and a deep, echoing stillness. The survivors waited, uncertain. Minutes passed. Then hours. The creature did not return. Days later, they reached a town. Life there was ordinary in a way that felt almost sacred. Trains passed through its station, entering tunnels carved through nearby hills, emerging intact on the other side. No carriages vanished. No reflections lingered too long. The world had not ended.